It's time for another Dice Tower review with Z Garcia.
Hey folks, today we are taking a look at a little bluffing game called Wakatanka, in which you are trying to get rid of all your cards before anybody else does, and slip your lies in there without anybody noticing. The game is from Bruno Faidutti, who is known for his bluffing games. He's a big fan of bluffing games and has done many of them. So, is this a good one? Let's take a look. So here's what the game looks like, set up and ready to begin. You are also going to shuffle up the deck of playing cards and divvy them out among all the players evenly. Be aware some of the cards would have been removed depending on the number of players. The objective of the game is one of two things. You can win either by getting rid of all of your cards, so if you empty your hand, you win the game, or by getting 4 of these tokens, and if you're the first one to do so, you also win the game. On your turn, you are going to have one of 3 options. You can play a card by moving the pawn here one click, one way or the other way, and then playing a card in front of the pawn, okay? The card that you play has to match the animal that you are playing in front of. Or at least you have to say it matches, because you're allowed to lie in this game. And so the cards, as you can see here, will have all of the animals printed on them, but some of them will in fact be blank, and they show just a little mouse here in the corner. But with this card, you have to bluff. It doesn't match anything. And so, let's say it's my turn. I could move this here, and I could play a card and say 1 puma. I have to say a puma because that's what it is, but again, I could be lying. The next player, again, the options are, you can play a card. Second option is you could call someone's bluff. And so let's say the next player wants to call my bluff. They could say, nope, I don't think that's a puma. They would reveal the card. If it in fact is a puma, then they would take the card into their hand. If it was not a puma, then and I was lying, I would take the card into my hand. And in fact, if there were several cards there, so let's say the cards have been building up, and I played this one, they reveal all of them, but they just check the last one, and depending on who was lying and who was telling the truth there, they get all the cards. So it's not just the last card, they get the whole stack that's been building there. Also, if the player was in fact lying about what the last card was, not only do they have to take all those cards back into their hand for lying, but the person who called out the liar gets one of the apprentice tokens here. So they get a little bit closer to winning the game, all right? So those are the first 2 options. You can play a card, move the character, play a card, or call the previous player's bluff. The last option is you can attempt to trigger a spell. And the way that works is cards are going to start building up on these piles over the course of the game. And you can, on your turn, choose to cast a spell. And when you do that, you are simply going to pick a pile, any pile you want on the table, and you're going to reveal that entire pile. If there are at least 2 cards in the pile that match the animal that they should be, then you've successfully done so. The cards will be discarded, and you will get one of these tokens. If you do not do it, because at least 2 of them are not the right animal, then you get all of these cards in your hand. And so let's say I'm going to try to do it here. I take a look. This was a lie, but both of these were in fact bears. So I did it. I get a token. These are discarded. If this had been like, let's say, if this had been like this, I did not do it. I get both of these in my hand, and that's it. And again, you continue doing that until either you have 4 of these tokens, the apprentice tokens, or you've emptied your hand. To empty your hand, you still, once you play the last card out there, it's still important that the player after you can still say, no, you're bluffing. So you still have to deal with that. It's as soon as it's out of your hand, you're not completely done. You have to survive that last play. But that's basically the game. Very simple, very straightforward. Try to get rid of your hand. Try to bluff the best. or just try to go for the tokens and win that way. That's Wakatanka. I tend to enjoy these little bluffing games, they're very straightforward, really simple ones, but there are quite a few of them, and at some point you start worrying about them not really bringing anything new to the table. So what do I think about this one? I think it's a solid game. I enjoy playing it. I was at first worried that when you played cards out, since you did not have a limited hand and then drew more cards, you started with the entire chunk of the deck that you were going to have for the whole game, pretty much, unless you got more, right? That you would not be lying for a while, because you wouldn't need to, probably, right? But that was sort of like a surface assumption. I realized then that the secondary way of winning in the game, which is to trigger those spells, right? You would want to lie, and then remember which piles you've sort of seeded with wrong information and not trigger spells there. And let other people do that so that they bust there and get those cards in their hand, you know. It's not a game where you're going to be planning to hang on to a card because you know you'll end up with the pawn on that animal and then you can play a safe play, because you won't be able to track that stuff. But you can still sort of poison the pot so that someone else triggers that place and they end up with it. It's also really tricky when it comes to the very end of it to be the one who plays the last card and it actually matches what you're trying to get rid of, you know, but oftentimes it'll just go to the 4 tokens. You know, whoever gets the 4 tokens first is the winner of the game. I enjoyed it. I think it's one that, along with something like Cockroach Poker, I'll probably put into rotation, especially with my family who tends to enjoy very light bluffing games. And so if you're looking for that style of game, I think this one's going to work well. It's very clear. The iconography is nice and straightforward. Rules are very simple. And that's kind of what you want from this style of bluffing game. It's just face value. Am I lying or not lying? This one does that solidly without any chrome, really. And I think that's good. So, Wakatanka gets a thumbs up from me. I enjoyed it. And if this is your style, I think you're going to enjoy it as well. That is Wakatanka.
Thanks so much for watching the Dice Tower videos. Find more great videos and reviews, as well as our top-rated audio podcast at Dicetower.com. You can also find other great shows at Dicetowernetwork.com. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower. The Dice Tower is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc., where you can find great games for great prices. Cool stuff in stock. Check them out at CoolStuffInc.com.